I wanted to see if I could structure a book that could take some of these insights that I write about and have been thinking about a lot about time and handling time and getting around to the things that count, and actually put it into a structure that would have the effect of helping people to get around to the things that they actually know they want to do with their lives. Mm-hmm. So in other words, not to become one of these books where you think like, okay, cool system for goal setting and productivity. I don't have the time right now, but in a few weeks when I get a free week, I'm really going to...
Right, like I need a weekend to set this up.
Exactly.
And then I'll be living in the prison that I've set up for myself the rest of my life.
I didn't want to have any of that.
I'm Patrick J. McGinnis, and I coined the term FOMO. That's short for fear of missing out, and it's why some people end up following the crowd when they should be blazing a trail of their own. But if you want to achieve greatness in business and life, you've got to break free. Come on, I'll show you how. This is FOMO Sapiens, where we explore how entrepreneurial thinkers find the inspiration and the courage to build exceptional lives. Welcome back to FOMO Sapiens, the show for entrepreneurial thinkers. I'm your host, Patrick J. McGinnis. And today, we are speaking with Oliver Burkeman, a journalist and author whose work explores the paradoxes of productivity and the pursuit of happiness and what it really means to use our time well. His previous book, 4,000 Weeks, became a cult classic among thinkers, creatives, and anyone feeling overwhelmed by the ticking clock. And now his latest release, Meditations for Mortals, is coming out on paperback, at least in the UK. We're keeping it in the hardcover in the US, from what I understand. And in that, he offers a 4-week journey into embracing our limitations and finding peace in imperfection. Welcome to the show, Oliver.
Thanks very much for inviting me. Glad to be here.
Well, it's very exciting. I was telling everybody, I was telling Oliver in the little chat we had before, that so many of you listeners told me about this book. And so I became attuned to Oliver's work, and I was like, this is amazing. So I reached out to him, and he kindly has accepted joining us today on the show. So Oliver, I start every episode with the same question, and I'm going to give you that question because I think you'll have a good answer for me. The question is this: tell me something unexpected you learned about yourself that changed everything.
Something unexpected I learned about myself that changed everything.
Mm-hmm.
What I want to say, and this is... I want to say that it was the realization that I could not do an impossible amount of things, which is a really dumb thing to strike you as a realization, right? Because it's just completely obvious that you can't do this. But I wrote about this in 4,000 Weeks, I had a very, very vivid moment sitting on a park bench in Prospect Park. I can go into much more detail if you really want, where I first properly understood what it meant to kind of relax into that fact, to not spend my whole life, sort of the rest of my life, anxiously chasing the system or the level of self-discipline that would enable me to do an impossible amount, but actually to sort of admit defeat, but in an incredibly sort of positive way that led to lots of good things. So I don't know, maybe that's a little bit abstract as a thing, but that was the important one.
I think the aha moments in life, it's funny because they stick with us. I don't know how many you've had. I probably had like 12. Mm-hmm. But it's incredible how, whether it's reading a book or just having the moment where something becomes utterly clear to you that wasn't 3 minutes before, they stick.
They do. And I mean, it's funny with me, and I think with a lot of people, they come as an intellectual thing in quite a sort of a blinding flash sometimes. But then it takes like months and years to live into a different way of doing things. So I am very much still kind of coming to terms with insights that I had years ago. And in fact, the new book in some ways is about that question of sort of actually living the things that you know you want to do with your life. So there's a big distinction for us, left brainy types who find it very easy to get a conceptual grasp of what needs to happen, but then harder to live differently as a result.
Good news is I'm a right brainer, my friend. So
together we can go far in this conversation. Yeah.
I know, you and I together, we're going to space for more than nine minutes. So I want to talk about the new book in a sec, but I do want to, just for folks who don't know 4,000 Weeks, or maybe you've heard of it, but didn't pick it up yet. Give us the quick, unpack the premise of the book and some of the major takeaways.
Sure. So 4,000 Weeks, the title refers very loosely and rounded down to a nice round number to the average lifespan in the modern world, in the developed parts of the modern world. And obviously that title is a little bit of an attempt to startle and shock. But really the thesis of the book, I suppose, is that by kind of confronting and embracing these truths about how limited our time on the planet is, how limited our control over that time is, this is actually a recipe for, on the one hand, more focused productivity and accomplishment, absolutely, but also for more peace of mind and also for a more sort of serene and sane and relaxing life. So there's a version of this I could imagine that I'm always sort of pushing back against, which would be like, okay, time is short. You've got to feel quite stressed about that and clench your fists and try to stuff every minute of your life with extraordinary activities. And that is actually not a happy way to live, right? Because it's a kind of you're just constantly asking yourself whether you're maximizing the value of your time. I suppose I'm trying to argue that when you really, really begin to get familiar with how finite we are, like we're so limited compared to the space of things we could in principle do or might possibly want to do, to the point of FOMO, of course, that there's no point fighting to try to stuff everything into a life. The thing to do is to let that go and really pour your time and attention and energy into a handful of things that really count. That's the big thesis. And then I go through different aspects of that.
Right. And I'm curious how you think about this. So I think that the connection with FOMO is so true. So I love it. And I think, knowing myself and many of the people that I spend my time with, we've always been maximalists and doing 15 things in a day. In fact, the reason I wrote my original article on FOMO is because I went to 6 birthday parties in one night and realized that it gave me no joy and in fact just gave me a headache and a hangover and stress. So it was I wrote the article as satirically to make fun of this sort of very niche problem of my classmates and I at Harvard Business School. But, I wonder how much, as you think about this, is this a digital age thing? When did this become, this was clearly not a big problem in Victorian England, from what I can tell. Maybe you could correct me on that, but there has been the encroaching, whether it's the industrial age or whether it's the technology age, whether it's the fact that it seems that we have so much more choice than we did before because, we just have more access to things. Yeah. We can get on a plane for,
Yeah.
When did it flip over from, just what it was to this thing that seemingly becomes worse every year?
I mean, I think you're absolutely right that many aspects of this are a uniquely contemporary phenomenon. And I kind of, you can place the transition point at lots of different places. You could go back to the Industrial Revolution. But really what we're talking about here primarily, I think, is digital connectivity and just the fact that, our knowledge of the things that we could do, the obligations we might feel, because it's not all good stuff, right? Sometimes it's you're connected to so many stories of suffering around the world that you feel you've got to do something to help them all. Or it can be, right, there are 6 parties that I could go to, and previously there wouldn't have been the way.
All mine are high class problems. I realize now, as you say that, it's terrible.
No. I mean, what's interesting about this kind of overwhelm that we feel is that it's sort of content agnostic, right? You can be overwhelmed by exciting business goals. You can be overwhelmed by awful duties and chores and obligations, partly dependent on how much sort of privilege you have. Sure, but the basic dynamic is universal. And I think it is really, really exacerbated, obviously, by technology, because that not only brings us much more information about things and makes us, enables us to see what it might be like to go to that city thousands of miles away or whatever, but it also leads us into the sort of illusion that we could do it thanks to technology too, right? I mean, you really can process a lot more stuff in the world, in a digital world, than you could in a purely analog one. And so it starts to seem like if you could just process a bit more stuff with the right productivity system, et cetera, then maybe you could actually get there to the sort of escape velocity place where you didn't need to miss out on anything. Just quickly, I do want to say, though, I think there's something timelessly human about this as well, right? The idea, maybe not in terms of knowing about 10 events in your city on the same night, but the part where we sort of regret having to choose one life over another. This is in like Robert Frost's extremely famous poem that every single American has studied in high school. There's a little bit in 4,000 Weeks where I write about Franz Kafka, the author, spending his entire sort of a big part of his life absolutely split between whether he wanted to dedicate his whole life to writing and not get married, or whether he really wanted to dedicate his life to the woman that he was or said he was in love with, and sort of kept the most epic case of stringing somebody along in relationship history. And so that kind of split is baked into the fact that we can only be in one place at one time, and that we're only going to get a certain number of years to do anything, and all the rest of it. So in that sense, I think it's called being human.
FOMO. Yeah, I totally agree with that. It is baked into the human. It's in our evolutionary biology, and what tends to happen is something that was once more existential, probably, and about sort of big picture things, has migrated down to very sort of daily, like, which smoothie am I going to have? Oh my God,
Right, and so the average medieval peasant would not have thought, should I become this or should I become that? Because the social world to which they were subject would have been like, no, you're doing the farming. That's the thing you'll be doing. So I think it does change in that regard. Yeah.
You can't be an astronaut because we don't have
those yet. Yeah, right, exactly.
But you can grow peas. Now I want to talk about the new book because it's called Meditations for Mortals, and talk about that for folks that are intrigued. What can we get out of this new book?
I really wanted to see, partly for my own purposes, but partly as a service to readers. I mean, it's always a bit of both. I wanted to see if I could structure a book that could take some of these insights that I write about and have been thinking about a lot, about time and handling time and getting around to the things that count, and actually put it into a structure that would have the effect of helping people to get around to the things that they actually know they want to do with their lives. So in other words, not to become one of these books where you think like, okay, cool system for goal setting and productivity. I don't have the time right now, but in a few weeks when I get a free week, I'm really going to...
Right, like I need a weekend to set this up.
Exactly.
And then I'll be living in the prison that I've set up for myself the rest of my life.
I didn't want to have any of that. So the book, just to explain to your audience, right, it's divided into 28 short chapters, 7 chapters per week. The idea is that roughly, because not being a control freak is a big part of the thesis, so I can't try and control how people read it, but very roughly, you might read a chapter a day over the course of a month. And the perspective shifts I'm trying to convey in those chapters, they might just sort of, sink under your skin, change a little bit how you went through that 24-hour period. And so it's something that I hope can sort of meet people right in the middle of the overfilled inboxes and feeling torn between family and work, right in the middle of still having their terrible problem with procrastination or distraction or whatever it is. Instead of saying like, first of all, you've got to fix all these things before you can start to benefit. Yeah,
it's kind of the idea. It's like, when somebody wants to run a marathon, you don't go out and do, I guess it'd be 42 kilometers in England. Is that right?
We're pretty mild with pretty imperial measurements.
You're miley. Okay, 26.1.
Only when it comes to distance. Yeah.
I was trying to make you European again.
No. Weights and weights we do. We're fully metric, but it's still miles. Yeah.
All right. So for our European and Asian listeners, 42. But you don't run that. Of course, you start training just a bit by bit by bit. You start the process. You figure out the comfort zone, and then you move from there. So for somebody who picks up the book, what are a couple of things that they would find that they could actually just implement or practice or experience, in that day that they're working on it?
Well, I'm just sort of picking slightly at random to give a taste of it, but one of them is about this idea that in the book I call decision hunting, and in short, I'm trying to suggest that we tend to think about decisions as things that come along, right? You're sort of going through your life, trundling through your life, and then there's a big decision you've got to take, and there are many books on how to take that kind of decision. But I think that if you're stuck on a project, you want to make forward progress on something that you care about, it can be a really good strategy to go looking for some kind of relatively irreversible decision that you could take about it. It doesn't have to be a big decision, right? So one of the examples I give in the book is like, you want to launch something that involves a website, right? You could just choose the platform you're going to build it on and sign up, right? Very minor thing. But because you're thinking about it in terms of cutting away alternatives, you then move on and your reality has changed slightly. And now there'll be a new decision to take about how you structure the site, whatever. I don't need to belabor this one example. The point being, you don't necessarily ever need to make these kind of grand gestures in life where you suddenly walk into your boss's office and say you quit. You can do it all through a sequence of small but real decisions that act upon the world in some way, that cut away alternatives. That's just one of the ideas. Yeah, there are plenty more. I'll talk at length if you want.
Yeah, no, it's true. I think for myself, I was one of these people for much of my life. I was very much a perfectionist. You can understand why then, FOMO would become a thing for me. Yeah. It's like, and of course, over time, you work at letting go at that you should do. But one of the big things is the all or nothing decision, and everything's a go, no go. Mm-hmm. It's like sliding doors moments in my life. Yeah. Decisions are doors in a sense that you walk through and there's more doors on the other side, and you walk through and there's more doors on the other side, and you can't know what would have happened. You don't have perfect sort of circumspect analysis, but if you never make the decision, you certainly won't move forward in life. And I think a lot of people really get stuck with that. How do you think the pandemic changed us with respect to, do you think the pandemic helped us or hurt us when it came to, valuing our time in our lives in a way that makes more sense?
I think it had so many different effects, but I do think that one of them that was very clear was that people were sort of, certain people, kinds of people were sort of pushed into a new way of thinking about what they were doing with their time. Right, there was a sort of a perspective shift that can happen just by no longer going into the office, just by having the commuting routines of your life disrupted, just by anything sort of pull you up short and cause you to rethink things. I also think there was that incredible sense of literally whatever you thought about the policies of lockdown and school closures, all that stuff, clearly it was possible for societies to turn on a dime in 48 hours, to do things very differently. And I think that gave, whether you think that was good or bad, and I think that gave a real sense of maybe these things that feel like it's just the way everything has to be done are choices, some collective choices, some individual choices. But you sort of realize in a way that you've been living in what Jean-Paul Sartre called bad faith, right? It's like you've just been sort of going through life thinking, well, I got to do this because that's what people do. And I do know of quite a few people who were sort of thought, hang on, oh, maybe I don't got to do this. So I think that was interesting. And then I think, just having all sorts of aspects of your time removed helps you, of how you're spending your time removed helps you see, maybe you were someone who suddenly didn't miss all sorts of ways you'd been previously spending your time, or maybe you're someone who realized just how much, friendship meant to you when it was difficult to see friends and things like that. So, all of that. And then, of course, to the extent that this was ultimately a story about a lot of people dying, that will obviously drive home the finitude of life to you. It's
interesting. Nobody thinks about that anymore. I guess if you've been personally affected, but you don't hear about that anymore. The numbers. We used to count every day how many cases there were.
Yeah.
And now I couldn't tell you.
Yeah, no, it's fascinating also, and how quickly things sort of seem to move on. Not for everybody, absolutely, but in general. And I guess there are lessons there too about transience, about this too shall pass, right? We're constantly being reminded of these sort of fundamental facts about how we experience time that are at odds with how we assume we would. Because I know that, if when we went into the pandemic, you were sort of thinking, wow, this is going to be the defining event of my life or something. And obviously for some people it was, but for so many people it just fades into the background.
Yeah, for society, it feels like, although as you make a point, like it's very easy to sit here and say, well, we moved on. Not if you have lingering health effects or have lost family members, but for society and culture,
Yeah.
like it's interesting. Find me a TV show that addresses the pandemic. There's like 3 and nobody wants to watch them.
Right.
We just want to turn the page.
Yeah.
One thing that it occurred to me, and I'm curious what you think about this as it relates to your thinking is, and I've been thinking about this a lot lately, because I feel like sort of things are in overdrive right now, and that people are working more than ever. Like you sent an email at like midnight and you're getting 5 back. And what has occurred to me is that when we had the pandemic, people had to quickly reorder their lives and change behaviors rapidly. Some of those have stuck, like work from home and stuff. People like that, obviously. Others have not. Nobody's doing a Zoom cocktail anymore. That sounds horrible. Unless it's like somebody's birthday on another continent. But then we got back to normal life, and people overcorrected and went like, YOLO, you only live once, and did everything. It was like the years of saying yes. And I remember myself just being like, it's just so nice to be in a room with people or to be out in public. And so I kind of overcorrected towards a deeply extroverted mode, which for me is, it's crazy because I'm already a deep extrovert. And now we've kind of come back, and we're trying to find that new balance, but we're in this environment where the news is very overwhelming.
Yep.
And so people are sort of finding a new equilibrium, but my sense is because of economic uncertainty, because of political uncertainty, because of cultural uncertainty, they're burying themselves in their work. And I don't feel like people are getting any more done. I just feel like maybe it's ChatGPT as well, but it's just easier to produce more stuff. But it does feel heightened right now that there's just people seem to be producing more, working more. And I don't know where it's going, but it doesn't feel to me that I like in my own life that it's like, I make any more progress in a day than I used to, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, I'm trying to think if that's my sense in terms of people getting sort of spinning wheels or treading water, or whatever it is, more and more frenetically. I think there's definitely a side to that. And that's sort of this old, well, not that old, but, idea for any one of us who's sort of a little bit obsessed with productivity stuff going back, which I certainly am, that how easy it is to feel that sheer activity is somehow useful, somehow taking you towards the future moment when it'll all make sense, or it's almost a kind of a hedge against mortality in a way. There's almost, sometimes I feel like there's almost a kind of bizarre psychological logic that works for us, where we think, well, if I've got this much on my plate, then I must be going to like live for long enough to do it all, right? There's a kind of a strange backward sense where there's something sort of existentially consoling about just being completely in the thick of things that you have to do. That's interesting. I have also sensed, just while we're sort of, zeitgeist diagnosing with no science behind it.
Love that.
A different kind of conversation about the return to analog things and human real life things, not just, that we're distracted by our devices and, we need to get a hold of our phone addictions, and all that stuff's true and real, but something more kind of, I don't know, something more positive about the sort of real understanding that it's in the human connections between people, whether through writing or through being in the same room or through whatever, that it is that ultimately matters, and that even for more introverted people, and I think I count myself in that box, ultimately what gives life its value is all about relationships of some kind. Maybe for an introvert, it's very often the relationship you have with readers while you're sitting alone in your room writing, but it is about other people. And specifically in the AI context, I'm constantly trying to articulate a point that I don't see enough people articulating, which is like, it's not all about how much these things can do. It's about the fact that like there's nobody there. Assuming you don't think that ChatGPT is sentient on the inside, which a few people do try to argue, then say, engagement with a therapy bot, for example, while it might provide you with some useful tips, sure, like there's no relationship there. You can't have a relationship with something that isn't sentient. And so I do think that's something that I'm sort of thinking about a lot at the moment. It's like making space for that real thing. Like if at the end of this podcast you discovered that actually this had just been a really brilliant simulation of me, like something would have been missing, right? Like the value of the conversation, I hope, would have been diminished. Even though all the supposedly useful or interesting things I hope I've said in this conversation so far would still have been said, something would be revealed to have not been present all along.
I agree, and it may even be just it's the future, because if you're having a chat with a bot, like say you were an avatar, I would say to myself, well, we've just had a conversation, but there's nothing for the future if I ever reached out again. You know what I mean? It's sort of like, it's just very transactional in a sense. And I think that is the thing about, listen, I love ChatGPT, don't get me wrong, but at least at this point, it's a deeply transactional, deeply uncreative thing. And it's delightful, and it helps, by the way, if you have tech problems, and it's a great brainstorming partner. But we're going to need to be we're almost going to have to like re-educate ourselves on a societal level about what are appropriate relationships. Because if you have somebody who's sycophantic that you can just tell to do stuff all day long, and then you get into the real world where people aren't doing that for you.
Yeah. I think this is a brilliant point. I've said something similar about this. I mean, this is how much of a curmudgeon and a Luddite I apparently am. But I've been saying something similar about this ever since, like Alexa, right? Like voice activated smart speakers and things like this. They especially encourage like small kids to be like really rude because you're just ordering someone about, and you're encouraged on some level to think about Alexa as a human being. But you're also encouraged to think about the technology as something that does whatever you want and only serves your purposes. And there is a word for situations where some humans relate to other people as if they're humans who do their bidding, right? This is slavery of some sort. I mean, it's tasteless to sort of bring it up in that context. But the point is, we've long recognized that kind of relationship is morally corrupting to the person in charge, as well as a horrific violation of the human rights of the person who's subservient, which isn't relevant if we're only talking about technology. But like, there's something bad in the character about having thinking about things as humans and then having them just be tools for your ends. Like something's really bad about that. FOMO.
Yeah, and when you think when you imagine that avatar to be real, or you personalize it to the point where you sort of treat them like, because I always say please and thank you, but then I've learned that apparently if you do that, it wastes like a ton of water because of all the energy. So it's like, do not say thank you to your ChatGPT because another tree will die. But I feel like we've come upon something here that I've been also circling a little bit, because it is deeply uncomfortable, and you can just see how, listen, when you grew up, I mean, we grew up, we're around the same age, like we didn't have the internet when we were like 12 years old, right? So we kind of had a period of time that was quite analog. But of course, if you grow up with these tools around you, they can, they're going to drive how you relate to the world in which you live.
Yeah. Yeah, no, absolutely.
Wow.
And I mean, I often think I have sort of had the kind of perfect experience of technology, in the sense that, I had grounding in an analog world, then the excitement of, home computers and all the rest of it. And yeah, I think it's not the same for people who are growing up into it. And honestly, poor fellow like my 8-year-old son, is just, I mean, he's really not kind of like lost to the online world at all, but he's constantly having to deal with his parents' kind of psychodramas about what level of engagement with technology is right. It becomes this very fraught issue, but because people like me and my wife are worried about it, and I think it's a very, very, there's still lots of journey to go for all of us. In sort of understanding how we relate.
Oh yeah, we're in week 1 out of the 4,000 of this one. We're going to move on now to the lightning round. So, are you ready?
Yes, as ready as I'll ever be.
I have a feeling you'll do well. All right. Number 1. If you could instantly master one skill, what would it be?
I think I would like to get a lot better at listening to people. This is quite exposing on some level. I wish it didn't feel so difficult to really, really pay attention to another person. And maybe it says something bad about me that it does.
It's hard. It is hard. I agree with you. It's something I work on too. Number 2. This is so apropos. Favorite use case for ChatGPT?
Like deliberately inducing funny hallucinations in the AI, I feel like is an entertaining thing. I don't know if you saw the thing going around on social media this week where people figured out that if you ask the AI that's built into Google searches to tell you the meaning of a completely made up proverb, like never confuse 2 elephants with a weasel or something, right? It's a completely made up thing. It will have a really, really effortful attempt to tell you why people use this proverb in life. I think that's absolutely hilarious. I'm not being very serious about the question.
I like that. Listen, I think it's really it's important, to remember to see the Wizard of Oz, right? She goes behind and finds a wizard, and it's like this dude from Indiana or something. I'm not sure. Yeah. I think in Wicked, he's just a real jerk. But it is important to see that behind the curtains and realize, okay, this is not infinite truth and wisdom. This is an algo. Yeah. And if you can do that way, then at least it helps you to think.
Yeah, I think it helped me think differently about ChatGPT. And I'm not a huge user of any of these services, but I'm not kind of contrary to anything I might have already said in this conversation. I don't think it's like bad. I think it's just incredibly important with any tool to remember that it's a tool and to figure out how it's useful to you rather than just assuming that it's going to dominate your life and then sort of retro engineering your life so that it fits the tool.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting partially because you have a whole kind of cottage industry of people who are telling us that it's going to kill us in 2 years, right, or it's not going to kill us in 2 years. Yeah. So you have this kind of, by the way, it's like anything else where like this influencer class that's trying to monetize this whole thing and grab our attention. And so it's just, it's fascinating. Maybe it will.
I read a thing and I read some sort of a couple of things recently that sort of came to the conclusion that like this is going to prove to have been huge, like as big as the internet. And I was really interested in that choice of analogy because there are a lot of people who would have you believe that the internet will seem like nothing as a social phenomenon compared to AI. And my vibes count for nothing, but I think the idea of it being really huge, but still fundamentally not completely changing the whole fate of humanity forever something feels right about that.
That does to me as well. I would agree. Number 3, what's one piece of advice you give to somebody who wants to do what you're doing?
It's the piece of advice that everyone gives, but that's because it's true and right. And that is that if you want to write stuff for an audience, you just need to do it in any form right away. You just need to send out a micro essay on a social media platform, set up a Substack and get 20 of your friends to subscribe to it. There are many things that are sort of uncertain and insecure about trying to make money from writing or any creativity, partly for many of the reasons we've been discussing. But one of the great things about the way that is now, very different to when I started as a journalist, is that if you put something out there and it catches people's attention, the upsides are huge. If you put something out there and it doesn't appeal to people, you're not going to be like brutally mocked by hundreds of thousands of people. You're just going to not be noticed. So there's like no real downside except the investment of time to doing that.
Yeah, I say this, I totally agree with you, which is, my article on FOMO, which I wrote as a joke 21 years ago and forgot about, it was out in the internet and did all these things in my life, changed my life in a bunch of ways. One caveat there is, you do have to be, if you were going to put something controversial out there can be like, you always hear this guy, like he's, a lady who's up for the Supreme Court and they wrote an article when they were, a student at Yale that was like controversial when it comes to it. So you have to be mindful that if you're putting stuff out there that is controversial, it could come back and bite you. But if you're putting out stuff like, positive feelings, you'll be fine.
Yeah, and if you really, really believe the controversial thing on reflection and for a long time, then you should be authentic. If you're just being like an edgelord, different matter. Yeah.
Yes, precisely. Yeah, it's such a good point. I love that. Okay, final one. This is the mean one. Sorry, but so I always say that people write books because they're the wounded healer of something. It's like you wrote a productivity book because that was something that you spent a lot of time dealing with. My FOMO book, whatever. Yeah. And I find that there's plenty of things that I say in my book that I totally don't do in real life and I fail at. What is it that you are advising people to do that you fail at in your own life?
I feel like I have a bit of an out here because I feel like I talk about this all the time, right? In newsletters and stuff. It's like I do not claim to not struggle with really any of this stuff. I'm much less anxious and controlly and miserable than I used to be, right? That's the proof of the benefit of it. Not necessarily much less of those things than compared to like any other person chosen at random. So like the passage of it in my life has been very good for me, but I'm still a work in progress. I think the answer is just straightforwardly like the urge to get on top of everything, the urge to feel like, okay, I am in control of all my tasks. I know what I'm doing. I'm processing all my emails. I'm, all these things that I'm constantly in my writing saying like, well, that is never coming. That moment of total command is never coming. And that is why you should dive into the things that matter the most right now. I am not completely free by any means of the lure of that notion of like, okay, but if I just put in a couple more hours or just picked up that new productivity system book that's out there or just like maybe then I could get there. So I don't believe that in the way that I used to, but it still exerts quite a pull on me.
Yeah, it's weird because you went from working from a newspaper to being an entrepreneur. I worked in large companies, became an entrepreneur. And when you're an entrepreneur, you have this weird thing where you have limitless possibility. Like you never know what could come up tomorrow to take you to the next level versus in a job where you have a boss who's like bearing down on you. And so I found that even though I have this existential idea of like, there's more I could do potentially with my own business, it feels much nicer than having some mean boss telling you have to do these things before you end your day. But neither is perfect, right? It's all about, at the end of the day, it's like you have to take control of your own sort of swirl in order to navigate.
And many of us become our own boss and then find out that guy's a real jerk, right? I mean, we can be pretty mean bosses to ourselves as well. In terms of
that's so true. I'm a nice boss. I give myself off a lot of time. All right. So I do. So if you want to find Oliver's stuff, you can find him on Twitter. We call it Twitter here, and
you barely can Oliver actually. Burkeman. But anyway, yeah, I'm.
Is that right?
Yeah, I mean, I'm around a little bit on social media, but oliverburkeman.com, my website, is the place to go, and then wherever you buy books.
Yeah, it's a very nice website, by the way. I spent some time on it, and the books are 4,000 Weeks, Meditations for Mortals, and a bunch of others. Oliver Burkeman, thank you so much for being here.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you very, very much.
FOMO Sapiens is recorded in New York City and can be found on YouTube at FOMO Sapiens or on your favorite podcast network. Theme music is by Mike McGinnis, editing and post-production is by Josh Elstro, and the show is produced by Matt Curtis and me. If you like today's show, please be sure to rate it and share it with your friends. And as always, you can find more about the show and me at FOMOSapiens.com and PatrickMcGinnis.com.